Is there a Brandin Cooks problem in the NFL? The 26-year-old will now join his fourth team since entering the league in 2014. He's always been a productive receiver, but is constantly being forced to find a new home from a trade just about every other year. In this video, we're going to examine what exactly is happening in Brandin Cooks' career, and we'll go over the thought process from both the Rams and Texans in this trade. So first, let's assess everything going on in the trade market right now. If you've heard anything about this year's NFL draft, it's that it's absolutely stacked with wide receivers. Any draft analyst will tell you this. Some will even say it's the best they've seen in 20 plus years. Ravens GM Eric DeCosta said, "In most years, you'd probably expect those players, meaning the wide receivers, to fill up the first 3 rounds. We think this year that there's a really good chance to go and get a guy that can probably be a starter for you in the 5th round of the draft." DeCosta has been under the Ravens for multiple decades where they've been one of the best drafting teams in the league. So it's pretty safe to trust his opinion, especially when just about everyone else is backing it up. He added, "This year we have a lot of guys highly rated in the first 4, 5, 6 rounds. It's exciting for a team that needs receivers because you feel like you have an opportunity to really add an impact guy all the way through the draft." So back to Brandin Cooks and why in the world the Texans would even trade for him. Well, first things first, Cooks probably had multiple people vouching for him. The Texans and Patriots share plenty of connections, even from Cooks' short time in New England. The most important of these connections sounds like Jack Easterby, who was the character development coach for the Patriots. Aaron Wilson of the Houston Chronicle said, "Texans executive vice president of football operations Jack Easterby has an extremely close relationship with Brandin Cooks, and that was a major intangible factor in the trade, with Easterby vouching for him, according to league sources. Brandin is an A-plus guy, great character, great work ethic, and he can help you build a culture," a league source said. Easterby knows that they're both devoutly religious. Brandin has a lot of attention to detail in a very rare category when it comes to practice tempo. The Texans aren't on the hook for the bulk of Cook's contract, so if things do suddenly go wrong, then they could always cut him. But I'm not going to act like the remainder of his contract is a bargain. One theory that's been floating around that even ESPN mentioned is the value of having someone who knows the offensive system, especially during a time where the offseason could be shortened like we've never seen before. Basically, Cooks can come in and make some noise a lot quicker than a rookie could during what could be an extremely difficult offseason. Thing is, if they were worried about this so much, then keeping DeAndre Hopkins would have been even more important. And despite what Twitter jokes may tell you, it's not like Deshaun Watson's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. With this being Cook's 4th team in his career, with every move coming from a trade, it certainly begs the question if there's something wrong with maybe his attitude or locker room presence. But Easterby, plus other multiple reports from the Rams and Patriots sides, have pretty much said nothing but great things about Cooks as a person. Still, by now in his career, the following coaches have moved on from him: Sean Payton, Bill Belichick, and Sean McVay. I'm not saying Cooks is a bad player, he's a good player. I'd say he's a low-end number 1 wide receiver or a very good number 2 receiver. Before last year, he hit over 1,000 receiving yards in 4 straight years on 3 different teams. It takes a heck of a player to do that with that kind of challenge put in front of him. But the chances Bill O'Brien can get more out of him than those other 3 coaches are slim. And it gets even worse because Cook suffered multiple concussions last year. And those 2 concussions happened within a month of each other, just to make things even worse for his long-term health. And he's had multiple concussions before last year. That's a scary sign for a player no matter what age. Just because he's 26 doesn't mean he's safe. Some of the frustration with Cooks is his boom or bust playmaking. His 1,000 receiving yards may not be quite as valuable as a guy who can consistently keep drives alive and get you first downs. Last year, Cooks caught just 42 balls on 72 targets. On the other side, you can say he stretches defenses and opens things up. That's certainly true, but Cooks is a little bit redundant of what the Texans already have, which would be vertical threats. Will Fuller and Kenny Stills, although not as talented as Cooks, can play very similar to Cooks. So maybe Bill O'Brien is looking at all that Chiefs speed and wants a piece of that. Only problem is none of these players equate to Tyreek Hill. Deshaun Watson does love the deep ball, and O'Brien's thought process must be that those receivers, along with strong receiving backs, will put defenses on their heels when trying to defend a quarterback with a good arm and one that can scramble. I think O'Brien mainly just mismanaged the market this offseason. DeAndre Hopkins went for too little, especially with David Johnson's contract, and factoring in what the Vikings got for Stephon Diggs. And Cooks, you could argue, they gave up too much. The Rams seemed desperate to get rid of that contract, and you'd have to think they would have taken less if their hand was forced. Finally, and probably the weakest market for free agent wide receivers in recent memory, Houston handed Randall Cobb $27 million over 3 years. Bill Barnwell of ESPN said, "Based on the rest of the market, Cobb's value was realistically somewhere around 1 year and $5 million. He added, "The Texans will pay Cobb and Cooks $38.7 million over the next 2 seasons, or an average of $19.4 million per year. Hopkins reportedly wanted a contract extension worth between $18 million and $20 million per season. I haven't polled every team, but my suspicion is that about 28 or 29 of the 32 NFL teams would rather pay Hopkins that much money over the next couple of seasons than they would the combination of Cobb and Cooks." For the Rams side of things, let's first examine Cook's contract situation from when they acquired him from New England. ESPN said Cooks was under contract in 2018 for $8.5 million and could have been franchised in 2019 for $16.8 million, meaning the Rams could have theoretically gone year to year and paid him $25.3 million for his first 2 seasons in Los Angeles. Instead, his new contract paid him $42 million over its first 2 years. By waiting until after March 15th to trade Cooks, the Rams also triggered a $4 million roster bonus for him, which they'll owe him on the way out. Los Angeles will have $21.8 million in dead money on their cap for Cooks in 2020, and more than $33 million in dead money between the failed deals for Cooks and Gurley. The Rams went all in the past couple years, and it was really no secret that they'd hit cap suicide eventually. They were by far the most aggressive team in the NFL when it came down to acquiring talent through trades. And it probably would have paid off if they had just won Super Bowl 53. But they didn't, and now they must deal with the ramifications. On the bright side, they got a desperately needed draft pick. And like we stated before about how this wouldn't make sense for the Texans, the Rams can get a receiver to fill in Cook's spot in such a deep draft class. With 2 second-round picks now, they could grab a high-quality receiver in the second that would normally be one of the top in his class in any other year. Basically, the Rams had to do this to right previous transgressions. After giving up 2 first-rounders for Jalen Ramsey, you know they're going to have to pay him eventually. And it'll probably be a record-setting deal. Along with clearing Cooks, the team cut Todd Gurley and Clay Matthews, and let Dante Fowler, Corey Littleton, and Nickel Roby-Coleman walk during free agency. GM Les Snead has said the team has been in contact with Ramsey's reps. So I personally feel like with the Rams, it was necessary to do this, and they probably got back more than they would have expected. With the Texans, every move they make, especially when it involves a wide receiver, is just going to go back to that Hopkins deal. So it's hard to judge this one on its own, but it really feels like the Rams won this trade. Let me know what you guys think of the deal. Can these teams fix their problems? Is Bill O'Brien just off his rocker? As always, thank you for watching, and please remember to sub it up.